Berserk began in 1989 in Monthly Animal House magazine, written and illustrated by Kentaro Miura, a man as talented as he was handsome. Berserk's first page showed its main character Guts having relations with a woman before she transforms into a horrifying demon thing, and Guts blasts her with his arm cannon, and that is a start. But out of this first page would grow an incredible story of struggle and survival, taking place in this massive world churning with conflict, filled with characters so goddamn likable, nuanced, and complicated that I may or may not have had to insert a dating simulator section later into this video just to communicate their appeal. Berserk becoming so beloved that it defined Japanese dark fantasy. Do you like dark souls? Do you like ridiculously besworded sad boys? Well, buddy, you like Berserk. The series' influence only growing with the 1997 anime, which was really good. The 2012 film trilogy, which, if you ignore some of that 3D, is really good, as well as the 2016 television anime, which is overseas. However, it was kind of a different story. Berserk didn't get its first official Western release until 2000. With the Sega Dreamcast game Berserk Millennium Falcon Arc Chapter of the Flowers of Oblivion. But as early as 1994, people like Andrew from Kent State University were using Usenet profiles bellowing into the void that was the dial-up internet, desperate for any new information on Berserk and being met with only silence. Don't worry, Andrew, we are all here with you now, because Berserk's influence slowly began to spread as staticky VHS-ripped fan subs crawled across 56k modems. Pockets of online fans galvanizing into dedicated communities such as Black Sun over Midlands and SkullKnight.net. Communities that would both preempt and evolve into the massive dedicated global fan base that would stay loyal to Berserk through decades. Even when Berserk's later releases slowed to the point that Guts could spend 8 years, 6 months, and 18 days on a boat, it did not matter. Berserk's fan base did not wane, each new chapter becoming a news article worthy event. Because when you read a new chapter of Berserk, you weren't just catching up on some manga you liked, you were living the latest piece of Guts' beautiful, tragic story, taking one more step towards the fated day when the Black Swordsman Guts would take his vengeance against the Falcon of Light, Griffith, a day that would surely be celebrated and remembered forever, and mark Berserk as the greatest revenge story of all time. And then Kentaro Miura died, and that never happened. The morning I found out Kentaro Miura died was... I couldn't process it at first. It was only later that day when I'm standing in Dublin Zoo and it's like pouring rain, and I'm staring at this massive, beautiful gorilla, and he just looks so tired and sad. And something about that just hits me. Everything I'd seen Guts go through, all his struggle, all his hardship, that decade of memories, it just came crashing down. That final showdown with Griffith, it was never gonna happen. Guts' story was never going to end. This thing I love is gone. I might have cried, and I definitely ruined my girlfriend's birthday. So today, this fucking mess of a video is gonna be in 2 parts. If you love Berserk and have been with it as long as I have, this first part is not for you. It is for your friend who you have been trying to get into Berserk for years. And to that friend, thank you for giving this video a shot. I know I talk too slowly and dramatically, but you will get used to it. I really think Berserk is one of the best stories we as a species have ever created, and that's not just hyperbole. Over the course of making this video, I read the 1967 classic 100 Years of Solitude, and it's amazing. It's like half as good as Berserk. And if I do my job right here today, you'll at least understand why someone might feel that way, but also why a series like this is worth getting into, even if it's never getting its true ending. And a little warning, to do that, we're going to be going pretty in detail about the first quarter of Berserk's story. I'm not going to spoil more than I have to, but there's going to be some plot events that are unavoidable. Then will come part 2, in which I will speak directly to you, the person who has loved Berserk for years, in a section I call, "Oh God, Berserk is over, Berserk is over, what's the point? What's the point in anything?" In which we will try to come to terms with the fact that this thing that was a part of our lives for so long is gone, and what that means. I cannot guarantee we'll be successful in this. In fact, we probably won't. I don't know what I'm doing here. This is like an impossible video to write.
Why you should still read Berserk. Part 1. Why you should still read Berserk. Damn it! So, Berserk, Chapter 1, Page 1, the aforementioned Cannon Blast concluding demon sex scene. And I want to start here because I think it's kind of emblematic of early Berserk in that it's not that good. Okay, I just want to preference that statement with like a million asterisks. Please just chill out in the comments for like one goddamn second. I am going somewhere here. If you children will just let me. Like its first page, the opening chapters of Berserk present this jagged, cruel world. A place where monstrous demonic nobles devour peasants whole and the night crawls with unfathomable horrors. But rather than our hero Guts feeling like the savior of this world, he more just feels like one more terrible thing in it. He doesn't hunt these demonic nobles out of a sense of good or righteousness, he does it because he fucking hates them. And you can see this in how he won't just kill them, he will torture them, delighting in the agony of their final moments, and dragging him further down this moral scale is his willingness to endanger innocent people, him telling a little girl that her dead parents are probably in hell, as well as him committing what will unfortunately be his first of several acts of child homicide. And at this early point you might think, wow, this Guts guy, he fucking sucks. And you'd be right. I mean, can you imagine going on a date with Guts?
Okay, no, I didn't actually include a dating section. That would be too silly. Anyway, I think what's so thematically resonant about Guts as a character is the dim light of the tavern's torches glint off Guts's metal arm, and there he sits before you, a massive mountain of shadow, his single eye burning out through the darkness. Even from across the table, you can feel every muscle in his body tense and coiled like a massive metal spring. You try to speak, but when you open your mouth, you're flooded with the taste and smell of steel, gunpowder, and blood. Your eyes watering, your voice dry and cracked, you choke out the words, "So, tell me about your friends." His single pupil crashes into you, driving the air from your body, his gaze tightening into a tiny needlepoint of darkness that bores into you, and through it pours a quiet stream of rage and hatred. Your heart crashes against your chest, your breath abandons you. You pull your gaze away from his, desperate for one single moment of respite, and after what feels like an eternity, you find the courage to look back up and see only emptiness. He has left. Wow,
you think, that guy sucks. This is the Guts we come to know over the first 9 chapters. A man who, aside from a single, mildly comedic panel, feels as empty of humanity as the nightmares he hunts. Who Guts is, why he is obsessed with hunting and torturing these creatures, or is even able to wield such a cartoonishly massive piece of death steel, none of that is information we have, and information that would probably help humanize him a little. But the reasons we don't have that information is because neither did Kentaro Miura. Miura's been very open about how at this point he was way less concerned with who Guts was as much as he was what Guts could do. Miura referring to this as the Fist of the North Star style of writing, i.e. a powerful character with an interesting fighting style. In this case, a man who can swing a giant metal murder refrigerator and shoot cannonballs from his hands. And this was kind of Miura's approach right across the Black Swordsman arc. He wasn't really thinking about the overall story of Berserk as much as he was what was immediately happening, which is really crazy to think about because as much as it might seem like Miura was foreshadowing major story elements like the demon fetus or the first appearance of Griffith, according to Miura, these were all ideas that he just kind of shoved in there and then retroactively slotted into bigger stories later. Now, don't get me wrong, the Black Swordsman arc is still enjoyable in its own right, even if some of the storytelling is a little clumsy and some of the artwork a little awkward. But the reason I bring any of this up is genuinely not because I want to shit on the early part of what is my favorite comic, but to let you know that if you're new to this series, this is how Berserk starts, not what it becomes. Something would happen in real life that would substantially alter Miura's approach to Berserk. Miura was informed that the publication Berserk had been running in, Animal House magazine, was going to be shut down, and that he could either continue his little-known dark fantasy manga Berserk, or start a new project with the writer Buronson, who also wrote Fist of the North Star. And just imagine that for a second. Imagine being a young manga artist and having the opportunity to team up with the guy who wrote the manga that defined that generation. That was about as close to a guaranteed success as you could get in this industry, and Miura did not go for it. Well, he would later write some stuff with Bronson, but he actually chose to continue with Berserk. But I think this caused him to recognize something. He could never surpass Fist of the North Star by imitating Fist of the North Star. So instead, he wanted to find his own way, and that desire led to a fundamental shift in the creative DNA of Berserk. Berserk took a lot of influence from Fist of the North Star, a large-muscled man with a unique fighting style ridding a destroyed world of evil. But there were some other titles that were just as influential on Miura, like the ambiguously pronounceable Gwyn Saga, a Japanese novel series Miura was very fond of that introduced him to a more Western-style fantasy world, about a large-muscled leopard-headed man who would frequently do battle with massive, horrific monsters, featuring an effeminate knight antagonist and small magical children. Now, the images you're seeing here are actually from the 2007 manga adaptation, which obviously could not have influenced Berserk, but I bring them up because I think it's interesting that when you visualize the world of Gwyn Saga's novels, how closely those images resemble Berserk. And also, just because I really love how Hajime Sawada draws Gwyn. There's a bit where someone tells him his leopard head looks weird, and he's like, oh. But if you want to see some direct visual influences that Miura grew up reading, there are two in particular I want to talk about. And the first is Pygmalion, which not only featured a ridiculously besorted young boy doing battle with large monsters in layouts that feel very similar to Berserk, but also in the appearance of a super cool brown warrior girl, who I've gotta believe planted the first seeds of Casca in Miura's mind. Possibly the biggest influence, however, and not just visually, but in the style of Miura's storytelling, is the shoujo manga Rose of Versailles. You have characters like Lady Oscar, who just is Griffith, except a lady, but also in how the story conveys emotion. Rose of Versailles pages are often these cacophonous visual explosions of its characters' inner thoughts and feelings, to the point that the first volume is literally just one lady refusing to speak to another in public, yet somehow feels even more intense than the rage-filled shouting contest I got into at my local grocery store when I thought a large man with a bicycle tattoo on his calf tried to skip me. And trust me, that got very intense. When you take these 4 series together, and maybe throw some bastard into that mix, you can literally see these strands of DNA that knit together to form early Berserk. And I bring this up for 2 reasons. One, I think it's easy to look at Miura's body of work now and see him as this unfathomably talented god of manga. But there was a point when he was just doing what all young creators do. He was making his own version of the things he liked. The second point is that when we talk about that creative shift in Berserk that takes place around this time, according to Miura, this meant drawing less influence from Fist of the North Star and more from Rose of Versailles, i.e. a story much more focused on the inner thoughts, feelings, and emotions of its characters. And where you can really start to see this is in Berserk's second major story arc, the Golden Age. A strange thing about Berserk's timeline is that if we lay it out chronologically, the previous arc, the Black Swordsman arc, takes place here, around the middle, but the next arc, the Golden Age arc, actually starts here, right at the beginning, as in the very day Guts is born. And the way Miura uses this to reset and rebuild the character of Guts from the ground up is kind of incredible. Take something like Guts' sword. Now, as stated by Miura, all this really was in the Black Swordsman arc was an interesting way for Guts to kill monsters. But over the course of the Golden Age arc, we watch as it transforms into a genuinely great piece of characterization. Ever since Guts was a child, his sword has been a way to connect to other people, as we see in his relationship with Gambino, the cruel leader of a mercenary group who adopts an orphaned Guts, viciously beating into Guts the ways of battle, and yet not even caring about Guts enough to get him an appropriate sized weapon, forcing this child to train with a massively oversized sword. Meaning, Guts fights like this because it is literally all he has ever known. The only way Guts can get anything resembling love from Gambino is by succeeding in battle, forever imprinting in Guts that his self-worth and value to others is tied to his ability in combat. And it's heartbreaking watching this child trying to win the love of this cruel man. And even more so when Gambino sells Guts' innocence to another mercenary. And if that sounds bad, it is. We'll get there. This moment also implanting the idea in Guts that if his sword is out of reach, terrible things happen. And so, even as a child, Guts' sword was not just a means to defend himself, but his one weapon against the loneliness and isolation that comes with being born into a world alone. So, in the Black Swordsman arc, the giant sword felt fun and a little silly, but now we start to understand the kind of tragic life that would create an emotional reliance on a sword that would eventually mold someone into a warrior like Guts. Guts' sword serving as a constant visual reminder that on some level he will always be that frightened, damaged child, carrying a weight much greater than he is. Throughout Berserk, Guts' sword is the only thing that really makes sense to him. It is how he defines himself to other people, and this brings us to the second major change in how Miura started writing Berserk, and that was by mixing in his own life experiences. And specifically here, the parallel between Guts and swordsmanship and Miura and art, which brings us to...
Hi! Welcome to the correction zone, where I pay for things I got wrong 4 years ago. In one of my previous videos, I claimed that this is a manga Miura drew when he was like 10 years old. The point being, wow, Miura is such a naturally gifted art genius. But this is both factually and conceptually wrong. See, this was the actual manga Miura drew when he was 10, which, not to shit on the work of a literal child, is less impressive. But I also feel like the wider point I was trying to make about Miura just being this crazy genius is wrong too, because I think it devalues the work Miura put into just drawing and getting better at it. There's a huge increase in the standard of Miura's art over the course of Berserk's run, and it's that drive to improve, to get better at something, that's the quality that connects Guts and Miura. Also, I'm wearing the Garfield costume again because this is my penance for getting something wrong. Check your sources, everybody. Don't be like me.
Guts defines himself through swordsmanship and dedicates himself to getting better at it. Miura defines himself through his art and does the same, and that's a philosophy that is palpable throughout Berserk, both in the substantial improvement of Berserk's artwork over the course of its run, but also in characters like Godot, the blacksmith. Like, listen to this quote from him. "Before I could decide if I liked it or not, I hit the iron in front of me. After that, I was so busy trying to improve and craft better stuff that one day I woke up an old man." Swap the hammer and tongs out for a pencil, and this could literally be a quote from one of Miura's interviews. Art wasn't just something he did for a living, it was his life, his means to express and define himself to the people around him. It was a group of 5, and I was pretty much the Yellow Ranger of the group, lagging behind in terms of emotional growth. And so, with these other guys showing off what they're good at, I wanted to find out what I could do. Drawing, I decided, was my only option. The only way I could keep on equal footing with these guys was to make my mark as a manga artist. It became this strange obsession for me. You can literally see that obsession in Berserk. You hold it in your hands whenever you read it. And I have a lot of specific points I want to make about how Miura's art is inseparable from Berserk's story, but I just want to take a moment here and just appreciate these pieces on their own terms. Miura poured himself into his art, the same way Guts poured himself into swordsmanship, and I feel that. People will find reasons to dislike you, they will find reasons to dismiss you and diminish you, but get good enough at something, and what they cannot do is ignore you. Guts' swordsmanship is his way of letting the world know he exists, a bridge between himself and other people. And it's where that bridge leads in the Golden Age arc that the real heart of Berserk begins to form. The Band of Hawk are every teenage friend group you were a part of. They are each 2 a.m. hangout outside an abandoned cinema. They are every nighttime conversation of Metal Gear Solid 2 whispered over cans of Dutch Gold. That was probably a little too specific. They are your first family who are not your family. and I love them. Each member of the Band of Hawk was based off a person from Miura's teenage friend group, and I think that's a big part of what makes the bond between them feel so genuine. But things don't start off that way. After things go wrong for Guts and then go wronger, he finds himself wandering Midland's landscape alone, his thick little skull devoid of any thoughts except how to survive to the next day, which leads to him becoming a wandering mercenary. And it's on the battlefield when he eventually encounters the Hawks, and something he has not met since Gambino, a person who can defeat him in combat, Griffith, the Hawks' leader, who disposes of Guts first very quickly and then slightly less quickly before declaring, "Guts, now you belong to me." Things get a little gay between Guts and Griffith before getting far gayer, and it's in this mildly homoerotic water fight that you can begin to see something. Despite the fact we've been with Guts since literally the beginning of his life, this is the first time we've ever seen him act like a child. We see him laugh and play and watch as his walls come down for the first time. And that feels very intentional by Griffith, as this is also the moment that he chooses to reveal to Guts his dream of ruling his own kingdom. And imagine what that was like for Guts. Imagine fighting and struggling your entire life just to survive one day to the next. And then, imagine meeting this person who sees far beyond what is into the distant future of what could be. That is massive for Guts. But each member of the Band of Hawk has a similar effect on him. Rickard is the little brother who thinks everything you do is amazing, an admiration and affection that is completely alien to Guts. Pippin physically drags Guts out of his own isolation and forces him to connect with the people around him. And Judo confronts Guts with the idea that maybe life is more than about survival. Maybe here he has found a place that he could actually be happy. And Corcus, well, Corcus is just kind of a dick, really, but in a way that he probably cares deep down. And together, all these connections begin to change Guts. The violent and frightened child starts to grow into someone who cares about other people and even relies on them. Guts fighting as a part of the Band of Hawk and even becoming their raid commander in battle. And it's in these battles we start to see something else. Berserk is fun? This is something I genuinely don't think is talked about enough with Berserk. It is a blast to read, and I don't just mean that it's funny, although it is that too. I really like this bit where Griffith's like, "Hey, Guts, check out this porn I found." No, I mean that Berserk is fun in the same way a roller coaster is fun, in that it feels exciting just to experience. This being because of how well Miura is able to manipulate pages and panels to visually convey everything from emotional concepts like loss and heartbreak to physical sensations like weight, motion, and timing. And you can feel that second one especially in the very precise conveyance of Guts' sword swings. Experiencing Guts smash the Dragon Slayer into a crowd of enemies carries with it all the kinetic joy of cocking a shotgun and firing it into a pile of plastic mannequins. It's rare Miura will illustrate the exact point of impact of a sword strike. Instead, what he illustrates are the moments right before and after that impact. So for example, right before Guts swings his sword, Miura will usually give us an anticipation panel, a little piece of visual data that lets our brains know something big is coming. And sometimes it's as massive and weighty as the heavy sweep of Guts' sword arc, and sometimes as subtle and minute as the clenching of a jaw. We then get the apocalyptic aftermath, as armor pieces, debris, and body parts rain down in the cannon blasts like wake of Guts' sword. By letting us marinate in that moment of anticipation, Miura makes those sword strokes feel weighty and powerful, but conversely, by letting their impact only exist in between panels and page turns, it makes those same sword strokes feel lightning fast, as our subconscious races to piece them together, only from the explosions of destruction they leave. Miura only building on this technique as Berserk continues, incorporating design elements like the sweeping spirals of Guts' cape to convey motion, or flooding the page with the enormity of Guts' sword, making it feel gigantic and overwhelming to the point that sometimes the Dragon Slayer cannot even be contained by the panels themselves, crashing out over their borders into infinity. Guts swings his sword and the world around him explodes. If any video game felt this good, that video game would be incredible. I wrote that line and then became obsessed with it. And so, I tracked down the Sega Dreamcast game Berserk Millennium Falcon Arc, Chapters of the Flowers of the Oblivion, the PlayStation 2 game Berserk Millennium Empire Arc, Chapter of the Holy Demon War, and the disappointingly titled Berserk Musou. I will now rank these games in accordance to best Berserk sword feel, and I will tell you right now, this section will be a complete waste of your time. Here are some things you could do with the next 48 seconds instead of watching it. Spend a little more of your day petting a dog or cat. Write a list of things you need to do tomorrow. Take a little extra time to tell a partner or family member that you love them. At number 3 comes Berserk Millennium Falcon Arc, Chapter of the Flowers of the Oblivion. This game seems kind of cool for reasons that are not related to its sword swing, to the point that I may actually play it on stream sometime, but it has, well, a early 2000s Dreamcast feeling sword swing, which is just a regular sword swing except kind of bigger, achieving it a score of 1/8 as good as the manga's sword feel. At number 2 is the Berserk Musou, which has some of the heft and weight I crave, but an over-reliance on motion blur and snappy Musou-esque animations soften the impact, garnering it a score of 2/7 as good as the Berserk manga feel. And at number 1 is the PlayStation 2 game Berserk Millennium Empire Arc, Chapter of the Holy Demon War. And oh my, now we're talking. Slow and weighty sword sweeps mean that each button press is a decision that, if calculated correctly, results in a fireworks display of cascading enemy body parts. This game seems kind of awesome, to the point that I may play it off stream, and am pleased to award it a score of half as good as the Berserk manga sword feel. Also, honorable mention to the Berserk sword feel of Impa from Hyrule Warriors 1. The point that I am making very poorly is that the action in Berserk feels incredible, but what's cool is that those heavy, weighty sword swings, those are unique to Guts. Other characters have totally different fighting styles with their own distinct visual cues, like take Serpico. We rarely, if ever, get those weighty anticipation panels that let us know an attack is coming, because Serpico's fencing-style swordsmanship is defined by light speed stabs and slashes. Or someone like Isidro. After Guts tells him that he will need to use his small size if he wants to be effective in combat, he develops this chaotic way of fighting that uses rolls and low attacks, transforming the page into this haphazard mix of chaos. Or the Tapasa, who use their massive knotted bodies to bulldoze through enemies and armor. Miura, unlike Guts' sword strikes, now focusing directly on those moments of singular impact. In one case, even letting a Tapasa fist burst out into Z space towards us, communicating the intense fury and force these characters are capable of. And then there's someone like Shirke, who is basically a tiny witch nuke as long as she has time to prepare a spell, which explode into these double-page spreads of just magical chaos, and it's beautiful. Each fighting style feels unique, each has a ton of character, and when those different fighting styles clash, it can result in some incredibly fun and tense tactical combat.
Hello, it's the correction zone again. In a previous video, I said how I don't think the action in Berserk had strategy to it, and in hindsight, that is silly and wrong, especially after the halfway point. Take the fight between Serpico and Guts, when Serpico fights Guts on the side of a hill in order to stop Guts using his gigantic sword, meaning that Guts has to fight with bombs. It is a fight layered with strategy, and it is great. I think I only said that because I thought back then that if you said something good about something, you have to say something bad to balance it out in order to come across as like objective or like fair, and I don't care about being those things anymore. Also, this is kind of separate, but I think in that first Berserk video, I was really unfair to the director of that series, and in hindsight, that was a really shitty thing to do, because I don't know what happens on that production. I don't know that it was his fault. So yeah, I feel like I should say that.
The action in Berserk is exhilarating, meaning you feel all the heart-pounding tension that its characters do, and as a result, it feels like you're right there with them, and that's important because it's through those battles a lot of the bonds between characters really form, and particularly with the Band of Hawk. You see them face gigantic, immovable armies and horrifying, dangerous creatures, but together, they survive, and they keep surviving, and as they do, the bonds between them grow ever stronger. And through those bonds, you start to see Guts become a real person, as the many scars of his horrific childhood begin to heal. One character more important in that healing than any other. As a child, Casca's parents sold her to a not at all creepy, rich nobleman, only for that nobleman's intentions to become horrifyingly apparent as soon as he has Casca alone, in an attack that is halted by the random appearance of Griffith. But critically, Griffith doesn't save Casca here. What he does is throw her a sword with which to save herself. And through this one small gesture, Griffith causes an internal revelation in a young Casca that is so strong, it transforms what she becomes. Casca now honing her skills as a warrior and tactician, rising through the ranks of the Hawk, standing at Griffith's side, having now dedicated her life to his dream. But even more than that, she's become his confidant, the only person Griffith allows to peer past his heroic veneer to the person underneath. She sees the toll Griffith's dream takes on him, and it makes her want to be stronger, the two sharing a special connection like no other, at least until Guts arrives. And Casca fucking rules. Like so many of the best supporting characters in Berserk, she feels like the protagonist of her own story, her dedication to Griffith driving her to become the person she is, and I love her. I mean, can you imagine going on a date with Casca? Okay, no, there's actually not a date this time. Delight dances in her golden brown eyes as she selects an item from the tavern's menu she's never tried before her gaze falls on you, and for a moment, there is only stillness. She's measuring you, considering these small details of your appearance before a small smile tinges the edges of her mouth. She asks you about yourself, and there's a blunt, nearly forceful edge to her questions. It's a little intimidating, but also invigorating. You begin to feel your mouth run dry as you realize nothing you say seems to be particularly impressing her, but neither does she dismiss it either. Rather, her face begins to fill with a careful understanding. And as little pieces of herself begin to fall into the conversation, you realize something. Every word this woman speaks, every subtle movement she makes, whether it's musing that no dress seems to fit her broad, battle-toned shoulders, or biting with vigor into the unusual lobster dish that has just arrived, there's a conviction to this person. This is not someone who has borrowed their identity from a book of poems or inspirational Twitter account. This is someone whose every belief has been forged in experience and conflict, transforming her into something real. Somewhere from deep inside you, you feel it. This woman could destroy you at chess. This woman would dismantle you in a bare-knuckle boxing contest. And in that moment, you find it very difficult not to fall in love with her just a little bit. This is the Casca that Guts sees, but just like a romantic comedy featuring Meryl Streep, Steve Martin, and Alec Baldwin, it's complicated. See, Guts likes Casca, Casca likes Griffith, and Griffith likes Guts. And yes, I am robbing this bit from one of my old videos, but if me from 4 years ago has a problem with it, then he can come fucking fight me! Casca despising Guts initially, not only seeing him as a liability due to how unpredictable he is in battle, but also a person who has stolen Griffith's attention away from her. But over years of battling and surviving together, Guts and Casca do grow closer. First as friends, and then more. They start to see each other's fears, their vulnerabilities, their weaknesses, and out of that grows something more tender. And it's here we get to see another of Miura's strengths as an artist. As discussed for perhaps far too long, Miura is incredible at conveying large, bombastic action. But just as important to Berserk is his ability to do the opposite. To capture these small moments of quiet intimacy between characters and fill them with emotion and meaning in a way that feels just as impactful as the giant sword swings. Like, I know I've talked about it before in one of these fucking videos, but there's this one page of Casca and Guts kissing for the first time, and just the way Miura conveys this moment. The tight, restrictive panels capturing all the minute, awkward little movements of the two, through them a subtle, intimate narrative unfolding. Guts, finally overcome by his affection for Casca, attempting to kiss her, attempting to comfort her. And for a moment, she feels the same, but she can't. Her responsibilities hold her back. Her loyalty to Griffith holds her back until finally, for the first time in her entire life, she just lets it all go, as the page itself opens out into this monumental moment as the world around them falls away, and only they exist. What follows is, well, a chapter of very tender bonin, which I would kind of like to talk about, but for several reasons I'm not going to. But it's simultaneously in this chapter we see something that is both really special about Berserk, but also easily its most controversial aspect. So I am going to drop a giant content warning here. Berserk depicts awful things, and if you are the kind of person who can have your day ruined by experiencing the wrong piece of media, I would strongly advise looking up a specific list of content warnings before starting Berserk. And before I give my own take on these parts of Berserk, I just want to acknowledge that for a variety of reasons, I am not the person you should be listening to about this stuff. But my podcast co-host Neve tells me that YouTuber Lady Emily has a video where she discusses these parts of Berserk. And full transparency, I have not watched this video because I don't watch videos on media I'm going to write about, but if it's anything like Lady Emily's other videos, it's likely excellent. But as for my own, probably flawed perspective on this, Berserk at multiple points portrays the most heinous things it possibly can against its characters. It doesn't always justify it, and sometimes it feels gross and exploitive. However, at least in regards its main characters, I think this is where Berserk succeeds in dealing with this kind of stuff, because it doesn't just portray the incidents themselves, but the long-term devastation and trauma those incidents leave on their survivors. As mentioned, Guts suffers some pretty horrific things as a child, and we constantly see the scars these leave on him. We see how he isolates himself from other people, and how angry he gets whenever anyone tries to touch him. And now tragically, with Casca, Guts has finally found someone he wants to be intimate with, but it goes wrong. His memories of his childhood come back to haunt him in a violent and frightening way, and he transforms back into that same frightened child, and it's devastating. But what's really cool about this moment is that Casca sees all this. She sees his damage, sees how truly wounded he is, and just accepts him. To me, it's rare you see survivors portrayed as cool and powerful as Guts, and rarer still that another character acknowledges their pain in a believable, open way. But that's what happens here, and I think that's amazing, and begins to touch on what is so goddamn beautiful about Berserk's story. A lot of its most impactful moments isn't even the gigantic battles or the massive monster showdowns. It's the times when two people just comfort each other in this massive and frightening world. There's a lot of small, beautiful little moments like this in Berserk, and a part of what makes those moments powerful is the feeling that they are just one small part of this much larger world. A place that is massive, alive, and frightening. Berserk's world feels gigantic, and a part of that is Miura's ability to convey large visual spaces. Infinite vistas, gigantic kingdoms, and fantasy forests, but it's particularly in that last one we can see something else, his ability to make those spaces feel dense and alive. I mean, look at this page. Look at all these weird little creatures crammed into every part of it. This detail is what gives life to so many of Berserk's locations, from bizarre and horrifying hellscapes crawling with I don't even fucking know, to man-made structures which don't feel like single-use locations for one chapter in a comic as much as they do monoliths of stone and concrete, molded and shaped by centuries of human belief, history, and culture. Whether it be an opulent ballroom that seems to stretch on forever, or a bizarre elephant castle, Berserk is constantly telling you stories through its locations. But I think the real strength of its world building is how it's able to do the same with even the most incidental of characters. Take this double-page spread of the Giants. Despite there barely being a single word of lore about the Giants, look at how much we can infer about them, their culture, and even their thought process from this page. These scales of their armor cobbled ramshackle together from human shields and plate mail. Their weaponry pulled apart human structures, using cathedral doors as shields and support beams as large clubs. And just check out this dude in the back who has very clearly happened upon a human fishing boat, snapped it in two, and is now using one half as a shield, the other as a little hat, and the anchor as a weapon. And that's not just a hilarious little side story hidden in this larger spread, it is a fantastic piece of visual world building as to how these creatures work, who possibly lack the intelligence to craft their own equipment from scratch, but use their massive size to bulldoze through other cultures, pulling them apart and repurposing whatever they can to continue their rampages of pillaging and destruction. And how much more fun is that than just giant big, all achieved without a single line of text. It's that same subtle visual world building that lets Berserk's universe feel so alive and dense with different characters. Berserk has dozens of characters, all with their own philosophies, histories, and drives, and what helps each one of these characters feel like real, tangible little pieces of this world is Miura's ability to capture their entire identity within a single page. Like, I could explain to you who Zod the Immortal is, or we could just look at this page where the sun sets on a raven-soaked sky in the aftermath of a great battle. Zod sitting atop a pile of corpses, a look of profound boredom etched across his face. We could have a discussion about how Farnese's father doesn't see her as a person but as an asset to be bought and traded, or we could just look at this single image of Farnese as she sits alone in her father's garden, her dress blending into the background, making her indistinguishable from the opulent shrubbery that surrounds her. We could spend an entire video talking about Guts' journey of healing. Oh god, I think that's actually what we're doing here. Or we could just behold this one panel, him bandaged and scarred, the struggle of his journey etched across every inch of his body, and yet he is still looking towards the horizon, still struggling forward. And I just want to say that I talked about this panel before, and someone in the comments said that these weren't bandages, that they were the imprints of Guts' armor, and it got a bunch of likes, and I just want to say that is wrong. Here is what Guts looks like without bandages from earlier in the same chapter, and if you think it's petty of me to pause this video to win a random internet argument from 4 years ago, it is. The point I'm getting at here is that it's not just Miura's ability to convey a large world, it's his ability to capture the worlds within worlds that are these characters that make every part of Berserk's landscape feel alive with people and their stories. And what's so compelling about all those stories together is how they all intertwine around the ever-transforming nature of Berserk's larger landscape. Every character has a consistent presence in Berserk's world. No one is disposable, and characters rarely appear in just a single role. Take the Demon Lady from Berserk's first page. She also appears much later during the eclipse. The same is true of the Snail Lord, the Demon Fairy, as well as this lad who we shall say takes something from Guts, appearing in another panel as an incidental character 20 real-life years later. And it's careful, impressive world building, but it also highlights how everyone in Berserk's universe has a consistent place. That place being subject to the larger tectonic shifts of Berserk's landscape. See, Berserk's world is made up of 3 planes. The physical realm, which is kind of the realm most similar to our own, the astral realm, which is where all the horrifying demons and fantastical creatures live, and the ideas realm, which I'm pretty sure was only mentioned once and then never expanded upon, so away it goes! At the beginning of Berserk's timeline, there is only a sliver of overlap between the physical and astral realms, and it's within that sliver that Guts will occasionally encounter something supernatural. However, as the story goes on, the spheres of the physical and astral realm begin to converge, as one reality begins to bleed into another, and more fantastical creatures begin to spill in, punctuated by 3 dramatic reality warping events that basically throw every known quantity in Berserk's world into complete chaos, forcing every character in it to reassess their place. Meaning characters like Daiba can be a story-threatening boss character in one arc and a kindly stable master in the next. And this is kind of what I love about Berserk's world. It feels like this massive ocean surging and waning, each character on it just a little boat doing everything they can, trying to stay afloat. I am aware that that last line rhymed. I like that line, and so do not know what to do about this. I would appreciate if we could all move past it. Thank you. Berserk's scale and density are a part of what makes those intimate human connections feel so meaningful. The other part being how those connections shine against the darkness that is Berserk's wider landscape. Because you see, this place is also a total nightmare. If Kentaro Miura had wanted to create horror manga, he would have been exceptional at it. He's got this uncanny talent to draw out the unsettling, frightening side of even well-worn fantasy tropes like trolls, ogres, angels, centaurs, and make them feel fresh and alien and dangerous, coupling his ability to create imagery like this with his capacity for thick, dread-filled atmospheres, resulting in isolated moments of genuine horror brilliance. For example, Rickard is out late one evening collecting water, but as the moon rises, he begins to notice some very strange things indeed. He starts to make his way back to his tent, only to find, save for a few flickering embers, the entire campground bathed in darkness, except for a single lit fire right at the center of the camp. And as he approaches it, something begins to float out of the darkness. A bizarre, hovering torso. But it's the torso of someone Rickard knows. Run, Rick! And out from behind it looms a grotesque, swollen face. Rickard recoils in horror. We turn the page and... Scenes like this are terrifying in all the ways traditional horror comics can be, but where it becomes genuinely powerful is when we dig into what Miura's horror is saying. A big influence on Miura was the 15th century painter Hieronymus Bosch, and particularly his infamous paintings of hell. And we know that because Miura literally put one of those paintings in Berserk. And I think it's interesting to look at these paintings and try and discern what is so frightening about them. Because for me, it's not the physical threat of any one of these creatures. Most of them just look kind of silly, really, but when you take them all together in this massive landscape, there's this implicit disintegration of sanity and order. Justice, morality, any overarching concept of good or even physical rule and structure, this is a place where those things just do not exist, leaving only a maddening kind of chaos. And when Berserk is at its most horrifying is not when it captures the aesthetic of Bosch, but that same disintegration of borders and sanity. Like this page, at the bottom, a small cluster of frightened humans watching as a swarm of horrific abomination falls upon them. And I mean, look at these creatures. There is no rhyme or reason to their appearance, each one a unique, singular nightmare of misshapen, swollen body parts spliced grotesquely with insect, animal, and sea creature in a way that defies any physical logic or sanity. And just imagine how you'd feel being one of the people witnessing this. Imagine the complete ungluing of everything you thought you knew about the physical world and the madness that would lie beyond that. These creatures are known as apostles in Berserk's world, and perhaps even more disturbing than how the apostles look is what they are. An apostle is just a person, someone whose life has led them to the point where they have lost all hope, whose identity and values have crumbled to nothing, someone who in that moment of despair has taken the people that make them human, wives, husbands, loved ones, children, and sacrifice them to the God Hand, this group of either angels or demons, in exchange for power and a single commandment: do as thou will. And that's interesting, right? Not do evil or serve your masters, just do as thou will. Meaning that all the apostles are people who lack empathy given power. Exactly as frightening and destructive as the creatures like that in our world. And I think there's a real horror to that. The older I get, the less afraid I am of ghosts or serial killers or that piano from Mario 64, and the more fearful I get of just nihilism, of people going empty and the darkness that can breed in them when they do. That darkness, that is the horror of Berserk. The idea that the only line between us and depraved, violent insanity is empathy, is our ability to love. And in the darkest moments of Berserk, we watch that line disintegrate, exposing that concepts like good or evil, they're just constructs, man-made ideals to maintain order, meaning there is no real morality in Berserk's world. There is only chaos, and there is only people trying to survive it. Berserk's world is gigantic and beautiful and terrifying, and that is what makes it feel so special when people do find each other in it. And it's that feeling that lies at the heart of the Band of Hawk. These are all people with their own history and hardships who have found each other in this world and united under a single belief in something greater than they are. Griffith. Griffith is the one person in Berserk's universe able to see past the hardship and horror of this world and envision a new, better version of it. A world where people don't need to struggle, don't need to be afraid, a kingdom where everyone would have a place, their only concern being the pursuit of their own happiness. And in a world as dark as Berserk's, that is a beautiful dream to believe in. The charisma and conviction Griffith draws from it being what pulls people to him, binding them together into the Hawk, making Griffith this irresistible, uniting savior. Now, he does have this terrifying necklace, but surely that won't have horrifying repercussions later. And he is very beautiful. I mean, can you imagine going on a date with Griffith? Griffith sits before you. The light spilling in through the window filters through his snow-white hair, and it makes it look like, my God, he's glowing. You struggle to find words, anything to carve a verbal path between you and this divine creature when suddenly he raises his goblet to his porcelain lips, only for a tiny drop of crimson liquid to plummet from it, splashing gently against his pristine white armor, and it leaves a tiny red blemish. His eyes glance upward, meeting yours, noticing you, noticing this, and across his cherubic face escapes a gentle, mischievous smile, as if you've both just experienced an intimate, private joke the rest of the world will never be privy to. In that moment, only you and he exist. His lips part, your hands shake, so his voice warm, serene, inviting. Who are you? This question collides with you. Nothing in its tone implies polite conversation. He's really asking. He really wants to know what you are at your core. And it's intoxicating. Before you can stop yourself, all your hopes, all your fears, all your dreams, they all spill out of you. And as they do, Griffith's gentle, powerful gaze never leaves yours. his eyes taking in each little detail. It is the most seen, the most understood you have ever felt in your entire life. Everything about this man, the way he speaks, even the way he looks at you, he doesn't just see all of what you are, he sees all of what you could be, and he makes you want to become it. It is impossible that a man like this would not achieve his dream, but maybe, just maybe, if you fulfill his expectation, there is a place in that dream for you beside him. This man makes the future make sense, makes you make sense. And in that moment, it is impossible not to fall in love with him completely. This is how everyone sees Griffith. He is the promise not only of a better world, but of a better you. A future where the things that scare you, the trauma that haunts you, it all fades away. And how powerful is that in a world as massive and frightening as Berserk's? That dream being what binds Guts, Casca, Griffith, and the Hawk as one, overcoming the impossible, fighting and winning again and again and again, till together they start to feel invulnerable. All the horror of this world, it doesn't exist. Only they do. And this, to me, is why this arc is called the Golden Age. It is the time in your life when you are surrounded by people you love and who love you, where together you are invincible. Each day is worth experiencing, and every experience carries value. A time where you find yourself staring out over the rest of your life and thinking, I would be okay with these days lasting forever. I hope these days last forever. They don't. Do you ever get to know someone and they become like the coolest person you know? Their conviction, their drive, their willingness to do whatever they have to realize their dreams, it's inspiring. And it makes you feel like you could be that kind of person as well. But then, every so often, there's just this little flash of something else. Sometimes it's as subtle as a single murderous glance shot across an empty hallway, or as emphatic as a house full of screaming people burning against the night sky. What if you came to understand that every wonderful thing this person made you believe, none of it was real? Your future together, the better version of yourself that could exist, it's all a lie. What if all the things this person was willing to sacrifice to achieve their dream included you? Guts and Griffith care about each other deeply. To Guts, it's a pure kind of love, an admiration for this person who saw something in him, who raised him beyond the traumas of his past and gave him purpose, gave him a family. But for Griffith loves Guts. To him, Guts is not just an invaluable asset to help Griffith obtain his own kingdom, he's much more than that. And we can see this in how he speaks to Guts, how he touches Guts. It's unlike how he treats any other character in the story. But particularly in this one little moment when on the battlefield, Griffith chooses to send a rescue party for Guts over military advancements. And it's subtle, but it's in this one moment we can see what is so beautiful and frightening about how Griffith sees Guts. Guts is the only person able to make Griffith forget his dream. And that's okay as long as the two are close, but starts to become a problem when so subtly a gap starts to open between the two, first beautifully suggested by the juxtaposition in this double-page spread. On one page, we see Griffith bowing, kissing the sword of the king, as he rises ever higher in royal society, spending more and more of his days politicking and soaring closer to his own kingdom. While on the other, we see still the only thing that really makes sense to Guts is swordsmanship and advancing his own strength. And not only that, over time, Guts has become increasingly uncomfortable with the dark places Griffith's orders have taken him, and has also begun to realize that while he's found comfort and success at Griffith's side, all he's really done is become a part of someone else's dream. And if he ever wants Griffith to see him as a true equal, he will need to walk his own path. And so, Guts makes the decision to leave Griffith and the Band of Hawk to pursue his own dream. This does not go down well. On a snow-swept hillside, the two face each other. In the same way Guts lost his freedom to Griffith when they first met, he now seeks to win it back, as the members of the Hawk look on. Surely no one could beat Griffith. I mean, this is the invincible Hawk, right? It's over in an instant. While Griffith has spent his days maneuvering himself up the political ladder, Guts has been steadily growing his own strength, and now an ocean of difference exists between the two's abilities. Griffith sits shocked. He's lost not just the duel, but the one person he cares about more than anything, and it destroys him. And we begin to see something from Griffith we've never seen before. He starts to make mistakes. Mistakes that lead to his dream crashing down around him. A year later, word reaches Guts that the Band of Hawk have been shattered, that Griffith is being held in a dungeon, and so he reunites with what little remain of the Hawk, being led by Casca, and launches a rescue for Griffith. But what they find is not the leader they remember. An entire year of torture has left Griffith withered and broken, his tongue cut out, his tendons slashed. He cannot hold a sword, he cannot stand, he cannot speak. All the beautiful things that this man was are gone. And think about that. Think about what that would be like if over the course of an entire year you were to lose every part of what you are, to every day fall further and further from the dream you had pursued your entire life, and watch as these same people who once looked on you with awe and worship now only do so with a cruel kind of pity. Griffith can see what Casca and Guts have become to each other, but knows that Casca will stay loyal to him, and all his potential futures converge to one, him and Casca alone, living a small, quiet life, growing old together. And all he has to do to obtain it is let go of his dream and embrace his own happiness with Casca. And it disgusts him. Griffith activates the Bayolet, triggering the eclipse, sacrificing to the God Hand every member of the Band of Hawk.
The eclipse is a nightmare. It is just sheer visceral horror in every form it exists. The comic, either of the two anime adaptations, or even the PS2 FMV cutscenes. It is the most broken, the most fucked up Berserk gets. Seriously, every content warning possible here. Because what you are watching is a man taking his own humanity and erasing it in the most vile and violent way possible. And one of the many upsetting parts about it is that you knew that Griffith could be capable of something like this. He has literally stood in front of you and told you. He has proven it in every battle, in every skirmish. He has built the path to his dream on the piles of corpses willing to sacrifice themselves for him. And all the eclipse is an extension of that. And it's that realization, not only that there is something horrifying and evil in someone you love, but that part has always been there and just needed the right circumstances to surface. That to me is what is so fucking awful and terrifying about the eclipse.
When the eclipse is finally over, the only survivors are Guts and Casca, and they've lost everything. Both have been marked for sacrifice, meaning that every night they are relentlessly pursued by demons, making sleep impossible. But it's also much worse than that. After the horror Casca experienced in the eclipse, her sanity is shattered, her mind destroyed. She can't speak, she can't even take care of herself on the most basic level. Now a babbling mute, barely a fragment left of the proud warrior Guts fell in love with. Guts has had both his right eye and left arm torn away, leaving him unable to wield his massive sword, but worse, his entire world has disappeared. Every connection, every relationship, everything we've watched Guts build up since the very beginning of his life, it's all gone. The only thing left, a black, seething hatred, a ravenous hunger for revenge against Griffith, a malice we can see as the artwork itself begins to transform Guts into this violent, frightening monster. And this is the man we meet at the very beginning of Berserk's story in the Black Swordsman arc. And I think it's incredible how this story retroactively wraps around and makes the Black Swordsman arc amazing. We now understand that Guts is this person born to nothing who steadily built himself up over his entire life, finding friends, finding family, finding love, and we've watched it all shatter in front of him. And it's heartbreaking, because now we know this is a genuinely good person succumbing to the darkest parts of themselves. Guts even abandoning Casca in pursuit of his one single-minded obsession: kill Griffith. This is as much of Berserk's plot as I am going to talk about. And if you're new to Berserk, maybe you're thinking, wow, you sure did give away a lot of that, you stupid idiot. But keep in mind, this is still fairly early in the story, and Berserk does tell you directly that a lot of this is coming. But also, to me, it's only here where the real Berserk starts. There are so many things past this point that I would love to talk to you about, to the point that it literally hurts the tiny bones in my fingers not to type them. The complex morality of what Griffith goes on to do, Fernice funneling her own self-loathing and hatred through organized religion, the fact that I care little of small anime girls, and yet I wish Shirke was my best friend, and Skull Knight. I mean, can you imagine going on a date with Skull Knight? Okay, so this was meant to be a joke, but I did end up actually making a date with Skull Knight for my own amusement, but it is far too silly and this video is already too long, so I'm just gonna stick it on my Patreon. So if you want to pay me $1 to go on a date with a skeleton, you can. These are all things I would love to talk about, and maybe someday I will, but this is my gift for you to discover, person who has never read Berserk. See, despite everything we've talked about, Berserk isn't a story of awful things happening to people. It is a story about how those people come back from those things. how terrible things will happen. You will get hurt, you will get heartbroken, you will lose the things you love. But no matter how bleak your world gets, if you just keep struggling forward, one day you will say, I thought never again. Never could I watch the sunset and be this calm. Never again could I sleep the night through. For all Berserk is, it is ultimately a story about how if you invest in the people around you, they can pull you back from anything. And maybe the idea of reading a story that will never have its true ending is still unappealing. And all I'm going to say to that is something I've kinda already said. A story is not some secret code, the value of which only unlocks in its final chapter. It is the moment-to-moment experience of existing in this world with these characters, struggling forward with them. And even in its imperfect, unfinished state, Berserk is one of the best experiences of that you can have. And that's why you should still read Berserk. I am now done speaking to the people who have never read Berserk. You may leave. I now turn my attention to you, person who has loved Berserk for as long as I have.
So it's 11 a.m. Saturday, April 13th, 2013. The lights dim in Dublin's Lighthouse Cinema's third screen, and there I sit with my friend Sam to see the movie Berserk: The Golden Age. At the time, all I knew about Berserk was two things. One, this image of Griffith, which had caused me to misdescribe Berserk to Sam as, I don't know man, some kind of Power Rangers thing I think. And the second was that there was a small group of people online that really loved Berserk, kinda the way I loved the things I loved. And I remember wondering if by the time the lights come back on in this cinema, will I be one of those people? I also remember thinking, I hope this film isn't too long because my stomach feels weird and I need to go to the bathroom. But what I had failed to take into account was that this was not a screening of the film Berserk Golden Age Arc Movie 1 Egg of the King, which clocked in at a reasonable 77 minutes. This was a screening of both Berserk Golden Age Arc Movie 1 Egg of the King, as well as Berserk Golden Age Arc Movie 2 Battle of Doldry, which combined for a total of 2 hours and 55 minutes. 40 minutes in, my stomach began to cramp. 70 minutes in, my forehead grew slick with sweat. 2 hours in, I feared that explosive public humiliation loomed, and yet I could not look away. When the lights finally did fill that cinema screen, I sprinted from its doors with the kinetic fury of a world-class greyhound being gunshot loosed from its pen. And as I sat there in the Lighthouse Cinema Dublin's unisex bathroom, my body draining itself of impurity, I realized there was something new in this world that I loved. Later, I began reading the Berserk manga and loved it even more than the movie. I became infatuated with Griffith, Casca, and Guts in that order. I read in wonder as the scope of Berserk's story gradually pulled out, each new character on their own path with their own struggles. Characters like Father Mozgoose terrified me. Characters like Farnace made me wish I knew people like Farnace. And through it all, the story of Berserk continued to be relentless and cruel. I was disgusted to see Griffith hailed as this savior, as this glorious knight worthy of worship. And even more so when I actually found myself rooting for Griffith, hoping he wins his battle against the Demon Empire, and even agreeing with his plans to bring about a new and better world. This is what I think makes Griffith such a vile and perfect villain. He makes me disappointed in myself. I fell in love with Farnese, Serpico, Shirke, and Isidro and the effects they had on Guts. I watched as they formed this weird little found family, and I became so invested in that. And after a while, sitting down to read Berserk, it didn't feel like reading a comic. It felt like continuing a journey with a group of people I really liked. But then came the day when I slammed into Berserk's most recent chapter, and unfortunately, as mentioned, this was 2013, and over the course of the next 17 months, Kentaro Miura would release precisely one chapter. This did bother me at first, but it made the chapters feel so precious that when they did drop, it was like a cause for celebration. And after a while, I started stockpiling 3 or 4 at a time, and then I'd take an evening and I would just get immersed in Berserk again. And entire years would go by, you know? I would start jobs, I'd meet people, I'd move home multiple times, I'd leave jobs, I'd lose touch with those people. But Berserk, it was always there. And no matter what else was going on in your life, at some point you knew there was going to be a new chapter of Berserk where you were just going to be able to sit down and see your friends again. And I don't even care how sad that sounds. It fucking rules. And I think that's the cool thing about long-term media. It's not just this thing that happens. It's not just something you consume and then leave behind. It is something that is happening in the same way you are. These characters growing and struggling as you do, their lives unfolding alongside yours. And then Kentaro Miura dies, and you realize that you're never going to see your friends again, that all you've got now is memories. And you start crying in front of the gorilla enclosure in Dublin Zoo on your girlfriend's birthday. Berserk is over. Or is it? At the time of writing this, there's a lot of online speculation as to whether Berserk will continue under a different author. And much like that one guy who paid me $1 on Patreon to tell me to go fuck myself, I have conflicting feelings on this one. The rumored author, and again these are just rumors, is Koji Mori. Koji Mori was Kentaro Miura's lifelong best friend. Here they both are at the gym at the age of 15, and isn't that fucking adorable? Mori actually being the basis character for Griffith, except he's not a total piece of shit human being as far as I can tell, and is also a successful manga creator in his own right, and someone Miura would even seek advice from about the future direction of Berserk. Who also, just to mention, wrote this incredibly touching memorial manga on Kentaro Miura's death. And it's, if you've made it long enough into this fucking mess of a video, you care about Berserk enough to read this thing. It's awesome. The artwork of this new Berserk to be completed by Miura's team of assistants, who are all very talented people and who have been helping Miura create Berserk for years. Right now there's no official word to confirm or deny any of this, and if it does happen, I think we owe these people a fair shot in whatever they do create, especially if it's what Kentaro Miura would have wanted. But, and I hate saying this, Berserk to me is Kentaro Miura. It is so full of him and his life that the idea of it ever continuing without him, I just can't accept that. And if I've done my job right up until this point, you'll understand why that is. Berserk to me, it's over. It ended in 2021. Okay, so if Berserk really is over, then what can we take from how it ended? Well, when Kentaro Miura died, there was one final chapter out for Berserk, and it ends with Guts coming face to face with the Moonlight Boy. This is a character who appears on nights of a full moon and is most likely Guts and Casca's child, and also Griffith's in a way that I don't like to think about very much. And that's it. And something about that, I don't know, it just feels kind of right, I think. Guts coming face to face with the sum total of everything that is terrible and beautiful about his journey, all personified in this one person. But it's also more than that. It's like a chance for Guts to be there for someone in the same way that no one was ever there for him, to take all his passion and rage and really just let it go and put his life into something positive. The raising of this child. And that's how Guts would stay, frozen in this moment of contentment till the end of time. But that's not how Berserk ended. Because you see, there was one more manuscript that Miura had worked on that would be completed by his assistants. And this chapter would end with the moonlit boy transforming into Griffith, bringing Guts and Griffith face to face for the first time in 20 years and ending Berserk on possibly the biggest cliffhanger of its entire run. And I've seen people try and justify this ending and say that it makes sense for a series so about struggle and hardship to end on a moment of extreme struggle and hardship, but I just can't get behind that, because Berserk to me has never been a story about terrible things happening. It's a story about how people come back from those terrible things, and to know that Guts never comes back from this, I genuinely don't know what to do with that. Like seriously, I for fuck's sake. I don't know how to end this video. This isn't a bit. I'm gonna stop reading off my teleprompter because nothing on it sounds like it should. I've been working on this video for so fucking long now, and I don't know how to end it. And like the section that's meant to come after this one, I've rewrote that so many times, but nothing works and nothing feels right. And I think the reason for that is because like I'm not talking about a piece of media. I'm not recommending something. I'm talking about a person dying. And I don't know that I even have a right to be as upset about that as I am. Cause like I never knew this guy, you know, I never met him. I just read his story. And now him and it are gone. And it doesn't feel fair, and it doesn't make sense. So I genuinely don't know how to end this video. Maybe I should just cut to like a blank screen. Maybe the next 8 minutes of this video should just be blank. I feel like in its own way that might be more appropriate than anything else, but I don't know. I don't fucking know. But look, whatever I end up doing, I'm just gonna put it here. It's just gonna start right now. Hi. It's been like 5 weeks since I shot that last section. So sorry if that got a bit weird. My facial hair consistency is probably going to be kind of crazy for the next little bit. But I've been doing a lot of thinking about things ending, you know? And I think the weird thing about 2021 was that 2021 for me was this kind of year where things ended. There was some personal stuff that I don't really want to get into. But my favorite game of the year was like No More Heroes 3. And it looks like that's going to be the last in the series. My favorite podcast, the Giant Beast Cast, ended after 6 years and 311 episodes. It was the year I finally came to terms with the fact that I don't think we're getting any more Hunter x Hunter, and it sucks that that's over. And my favorite album of the year was by this artist called Swordsman. And the album is just this hour and a half of just this incredible joy and euphoria of having experienced the very best times of your entire life. But then it's like cut with this deep, devastating sadness that those days are over. And it's called We Had Good Times Together. Don't forget that. This being Sursflut's final album. There's a very personal story to this album that is not mine to talk about, so I'm not going to. But I guess my takeaway is that while I am very sad to see Sursflut stop making music, I'm glad that they seem to be doing what's right for them. You can't separate people from the art they create, and neither can last forever. Like, maybe you've been watching this channel for a long time, you know? Maybe you're one of the many very kind messages I got about that last Garfield video. And those messages mean a lot to me, you know? They give what I do meaning. And I'm proud of that Garfield video, but if I'm gonna be honest, it kind of killed me, you know? I saw a lot of people say like, oh, that's your best video, and I don't know how you're gonna top this one. And the truth is that like, I don't know how I'm gonna top that video, but it's probably not gonna be with a healthy, sustainable lifestyle. I still love this job, you know, even after 6 years. But there is a pressure that comes with it that it is terrifying. And it drains you of every emotion you have. And I know I can't keep that up forever. The day is going to come when I post my last video, and that's going to be it. And that day could be in 5 years, 1 year, 6 months, or right now. It's not. I'm doing okay. I still like doing this, but my point is that whatever you felt in that moment, the day is going to come when that feeling is real. And nothing about that is special or unique to me or this channel. Every creator, they're just a person, you know? Delicate and finite. Kentaro Miura was born on July 11th, 1966. He started work on Berserk at just 22 years old, and from there, he'd start work every day around 8:30 p.m. He would draw for 5 straight hours, and then at 3:30 a.m. would take a 30-minute break to eat and watch television. He would then work another 2.5 hours, taking another 30-minute break at 6 a.m., after which he would work as many as 9 consecutive hours, finishing as late as 3 p.m., at which point he would spend whatever little time he could sleeping before starting the day again at 8:30 p.m. This was not crunch for Miura. This was not some emergency work session. This was how he worked 7 days a week, averaging 15 hours a day. He took no holidays, and that was Miura's life for 20 years. We've talked a lot about the quality of Berserk in this video and how much it improved over time. This was the cost, and it's devastating to read about it in Miura's own words. It paints the picture of this man experiencing the world only through this small television next to his desk. Working, always, even through big life events like Christmas, New Year's, high school reunions. Someone who'd talk about how lonely he was, how he'd only had 2 days off a year, how he'd sleep less than 4 hours a night and collapse from exhaustion, and describe his life as a mess. Nothing but manga. And that pain, that isolation, I think you can really feel that in Berserk. We've talked about how much Miura's life seems to echo through Guts, but it does this in so many ways. Even look at Miura choosing to continue with Berserk over the guaranteed success of working with Bronson, and how closely that resembles Guts walking away from the guaranteed success of Griffith and the Hawk in order to find his own path. These are both people driven by a single-minded obsession to define themselves, to prove themselves to everyone around them, and that desire would lead both to a place where it consumed their whole life, leaving their bodies and minds under constant strain, leaving them alone and isolated, struggling to get even a single night's sleep. Just like Guts chose to leave Casca behind to pursue his dream of killing Griffith, Miura left behind any chance of a normal life for his dream of creating manga. Miura wanted to define himself through manga. He wanted to prove to himself and everyone else that he had value. That was his dream. And he did that. He did that on the grandest scale possible. Remember Andrew from Kent State University? That one lonely internet post bellowing into an empty online void for any other fans of Berserk? Well, compare that to the global outpouring of grief that happened around Miura's passing. Thousands of pieces of beautiful fan art, industry legends eulogizing Miura, the massive and touching tributes from different online communities, millions of people gathering, all to mourn this man. Miura achieved his dream. He achieved it as much as anyone could have. But the thing about a dream is that it never really ends. There's always more you can pursue, always more you can achieve. And in their own way, I think that's what trapped both Guts and Miura. And I think things were like that for a really long time. But then there's this moment way later in Berserk. And it's right at the end of this massive story arc and this huge chaotic battle, and it's all left Guts just completely exhausted. And just as his consciousness begins to slip away, he stares out over this great plain. And there, miles away, he sees him. Griffith. Now, except for the very final page in Berserk, this would be the last time Guts and Griffith would ever lay eyes on each other. And so, if Guts is going to fulfill his dream and take his revenge against Griffith, it's gonna have to be right now. This would be his last chance. But he doesn't. Instead, he closes his eyes and just rests. Griffith disappearing into the horizon, and Guts boarding the infamous boat to Alfheim. Infamous because this was the point that would mark the beginning of a string of delays and hiatuses that would dramatically slow the release of Berserk, much to fan agony. So, Berserk eventually going unfinished, this was the moment when that started to happen. However, This was also a critical moment in both the lives of Guts and Miura. You look at Guts' life leading up to this point. Remember when I said I'd talk about Farnese and the gang someday? Well, turns out that that day is today. What I love about this group of people so much is how they all help each other move past the individual stages of life that each one of them was trapped in. And in the case of Guts, it's how his new companions help him shoulder the burden of everything that's happened, and in doing so, give him the space and perspective to move past it and decide now what really matters to him. Farnese becomes Casca's caretaker, something that Guts was completely unable to do, leading to just fucking tragic panels like this one. And in doing so, she takes the burden of guilt off Guts and lets him actually see Casca happy. Serpico becomes an actual ally to Guts in battle, his first since the Band of Hawk, and Isidro doesn't actually do that much, honestly, but I think he's funny. And Shirke not only helps quell the violent rage that is literally devouring Guts from the inside, but she also seals Guts and Casca's curse marks, meaning that they can both finally sleep through the night. And again, listen to those words. Guts looking out at his companions playing in the ocean. I thought never again. Never could I watch the sun set and be this calm. Never again could I sleep the night through. And it's like, that violent asshole from the Black Swordsman arc, that is not this person anymore. This is someone who cares about the people he loves more than anything. And so, when Guts closes his eyes on that hillside and lets Griffith go, that is Guts sacrificing his dream for the people he loves and his own happiness. The exact opposite of what Griffith did in the eclipse. And you look at Guts' life after this point. You look at when he finally gets to Alfheim, and goddamn, when we get to that moment when Casca's mind is restored and someone asks her, does she remember Guts? And she just makes this face. It's like, it was fucking incredible. It's like after so many years, after everything, we got to see our friend again. And this part of the story, it happened just 10 chapters away from Berserk ending. We nearly didn't get this moment, but we did. And it's in moments like these that you realize, through all the pain and all the struggle, through everything Guts has survived, he's done it. He has somehow made his way to a second golden age, and it's fucking beautiful. The reason I think this is so important in understanding Miura's story is that when Kentaro Miura died, people were understandably quick to associate his death with overwork, to the point that one of Miura's assistants actually pushed back on that idea, stating that for the last 15 years, Miura had taken pretty good care of himself, both physically and emotionally. And what I think's really interesting about that time frame is that if we go back 15 years from 2021, we end up right in the period of 2006 to 2007 that ends with that moment on the hillside and Guts getting on the boat to Alfheim. According to that tweet, this is when Miura really started taking care of himself. And I believe that. Not only is this the point when Berserk's chapters did actually slow in release, but those agonizing author's notes about Miura's overwork and loneliness, it's around this point that they stop. So, what I think that Moments on the Hillside is both Guts and Miura letting go of their dream and putting their own lives and happiness first. For Guts, it was the dream of killing Griffith. For Miura, it was the overwork that was killing him. And I mean, look at Miura's life after this point. With the assistance of Studio Gaga, he got to work on 2 other manga, which is something he had wanted to do for decades. And remember that photo of Miura and his best friend Koji Mori at the gym when they were 15? Well, here they are recreating that photo 30 years later, and it's hard to imagine that if Miura had kept that unsustainable lifestyle, that he could have had moments like this. And I hope he had a lot of them. That happiness that Guts found from putting his life before his dream, I hope that reflects the happiness Miura found by doing the same. I hope he found his own golden age. When you look at Berserk like this, it becomes more than a story about healing. It becomes a story about how there are things you will want in this life more than anything. But ultimately, the day will come when you will need to find the strength to choose your own happiness over those dreams. And fuck, that is an incredible message to leave behind. That is the legacy of Kentaro Miura. This is a man who gave us everything. And while his story may not be complete, it's nearly because of that his message is. And for that, there's only one thing to say. Thank you, Kentaro Miura.